Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I hope that you are having a fabulous day. I can't tell you about my fabulous day. It's it goes between bad and awful these days, but I am very excited at the moment. I had something happen, and I just can't talk about it yet. I'm sorry. But I had to
Such a
tease you.
tease.
I had to tease you. I had to taunt you because that's just who I am. Let us go ahead and do a timestamp where it is a different time in a lot of the world, but not all of the world. It is it is it is February 21st, Friday. Thank God it's Friday, February 21st in part of the world. It is 1 a.m. in Kyiv. It is 3 a.m. in Tbilisi. It is 7 a.m. in Perth, Western Australia, 8 a.m. in Tokyo. Then we will go in the Wayback Time Machine to Thursday, February 20th, and it is 11 p.m. UTC, as in London. It is 6 p.m. in New York City. It is 3 p.m. in the Pacific Northwest, Portland, Oregon. It is 2 p.m. in Anchorage, Alaska. And lest I forget, it is 4 p.m. in Edmonton, Alberta, or also known as Warburg, Alberta, which is a really, really teeny place that not a whole lot of people know. But I think I see somebody who may know where that is. So here we are. I'm handing it over to the two co-hosts, which I already have in place. So yeah, I'm gonna shut up now.
Talk about an efficient operation here.
Yeah, I
Uh,
know, but I see somebody just like, oh my God, somebody mentioned Warburg, Alberta. I've been there. I mean, that is just teeny.
yeah, well, and I've now heard of it. So between the two of us, um, anyway, I just wanted to mention very, very quickly. Today, the 20th, February 20th, is the day in Ukraine that they commemorate the Heavenly Hundred, the hundred and a few extra innocent Ukrainians who were killed by Yanukovych's thugs. Revolution of Dignity, which really was part of what galvanized all the changes that we've seen subsequent in Ukraine. It's hard to believe it's only 11 years ago, but this is a solemn day every year in Ukraine, remembering those people who gave their lives for Ukrainian democracy and for Ukrainian state. So it's good to remember them. Anyway, I just want to say hello to Alex Prince before I go back to you because this is actually Alex's show. I'm just honing in on it. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you. Yeah, no, please do. I've got just another minute or two here worth of last minute stuff I'm doing, like grabbing myself a glass of water. So I will be right back.
Perfect. Okay, Prince can fill up a minute, I'm sure. Yeah, over to you, Prince.
Yeah, I actually can, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit more tonight on understanding genocide. But talking about the Heavenly Hundred, you made me think of a tweet that I read today from somebody that I admire greatly and am fortunate to have talked to um, and communicated with on a semi-regular basis, somewhat regular basis for the last year, almost year. But Alexandra Medvechuk, um, people see her now today as a Nobel Peace Prize winner, a person who speaks for Ukraine in all kinds of different countries and all kinds of different places because she is a Nobel Peace Prize winner, right? But where was Alexandra Medvechuk on February 20th, 2014? And she put a tweet out today. And if you'll indulge me, I will read it really quick because it is it's powerful in my opinion. 11 years ago, millions of people in Ukraine had bravely stood up against corrupt authoritarian regime during the Revolution of Dignity. They took to the streets across the entire country demanding that the regime continue moving towards Europe, towards genuine democratic values. They peacefully demonstrated just for a chance to build a country where rights of each person are protected, government accountable, courts independent, and police do not beat peaceful student demonstrators. On the morning of February 20th, 2014, our Euromaidan SOS hotline started to be ringing all the time. people reported that peaceful demonstrations were being shot on peaceful demonstrators, excuse me, were being shot on the Maidan. Our volunteers went to morgues, churches, and hospitals to document information about the killed and wounded. They gave us photos of the bodies of the dead, their documents, the descriptions of personal belongings. We were in a hurry because we didn't know how much time we had left to identify everybody killed by the Yanukovych regime. Around this time, my husband called me. He said that he was on the Maidan, that he loved me, and said goodbye. I had never been so scared in my life. I only recently realized why I constantly burst into tears during my speeches. A few days after the shooting on the Maidan, we were preparing the first mobile group for Crimea, and then I went headlong into kidnapping, torture, sexual violence, and murder of civilians in the occupied territories. I have never cried over those February days in these 11 years. There was simply no time. May the memory of all those who did not return be cherished. Strength to their families. That's a peek into
Wow.
wow is right, right? Wow is right.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I know several people who were on the Maidan in those on those days, and this is what you always hear from them. It's really very, very moving. It changed people, you know.
Yeah, it did. And it is something I've noticed that, watching Alexandra speak very regularly, she does start to cry. And she looks like she's been crying when she's speaking very often. You can notice that in her Nobel lecture. She is moved very often to tears, and and to hear this today from her was very, very moving and very, very, very timely, something that we need to hear, I think. I sent her a message and I apologized for my country today. I told her that it has inspired me to work even harder for Ukraine, but I am very, very sorry for my country and what it is doing.
That's always appreciated. It's it's rough, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit tonight too. It's well, actually, we can. Is that everything you wanted to bring up, Prince, or should we
Yes,
get?
it really is everything I wanted to bring up. It just with Robin having mentioned the Heavenly Hundred and me having seen this message and today and sending that message to Alexandra, just apologizing for my country and what it is doing. Um, and acknowledging this message and that, I appreciated being able to read that from her. Um, I just it's an important thing people need to realize. This genocide didn't start in 2022. It started before, and we'll talk about that more later in our genocide segment. But here, to take your segment, I apologize.
You know, I just want to refer to one other thing. Euromaidan Press has an article citing well, really from Yaroslav Herzog, and that's one of the things he points out. I posted it in the back channel before. He basically says, you know, it's a total mistake to think this started it started in 2014 or 2022 or even 2014, that this has been going on for centuries. You know, it's this intention to destroy any vestige of Ukrainianness. So it's nothing new. It's our mistake in assuming that something started in 2022. Anyway, but thanks. And thanks, Prince. Thanks for reading that. Back to you, Alex.
Alrighty, thank you, Robin. So hello, everybody. Welcome to Signal and Noise, your disinformation dispatch. This is your weekly disinformation discussion on Volia Radio on Thursdays from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm your host, Alex, and tonight I'm co-hosting with Robin. In this segment, we'll be tackling the complex and, quite frankly, terrifying world of disinformation and trying to share what we've learned. I'm here to help us all navigate the sea of disinformation surrounding Russia's genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Each week, we dissect disinformation, uncover truths we can, and arm you with some knowledge to help you stay informed. So let's cut through the noise and get to the signal. Now, before we start, there's a lot of content for tonight. I'm going to try to get it all out. We often do get sidetracked during our discussions. If you do have questions, please keep them topical, brief, and focused. Try to keep it under a minute if you can. If there's a relevant tangent, please let's make a note of it. And that's something I will ask you to do, Robin. If something comes up, someone wants to talk about something, just make a note and we'll get back to it. And we will revisit it later. Do be aware that we will be moderating carefully during this segment. If you're not a recognized speaker that has been here before, we may not be able to bring you up during the segment today. So today we're going to be taking a look at stochastic terrorism, where information is spread to incite random individuals to commit acts of violence, furthering political agendas through fear and chaos. So the term specifically refers to the use of mass communication or propaganda to incite acts of violence by individuals who are not directly connected to the speaker or group spreading the message. The term specifically refers to the unpredictable nature of the violence. While the specific perpetrator or timing of the act is unknown, the rhetoric or messaging increases the probability that someone will carry out a violent act in response. So the key points are: it is incitement without direct command. The individuals or groups spreading the message are not directly telling anyone to commit violence, but their language encourages hostility towards certain groups or individuals. The violence is unpredictable, but not surprising. So the exact timing, perpetrator, or specific target is uncertain, but the violent act is seen as a likely outcome. And then the denial of responsibility. Since the speaker or propagator did not directly call for violence, they can deny responsibility when an attack occurs, even though their rhetoric may have been a contributing factor. So the goal is to create an environment of heightened tension and hostility, where certain individuals are radicalized enough to take violent action based on the messaging, often targeting marginalized groups or political opponents. By promoting fantasies of vigilantism, the disinformation machine is essentially endorsing a return to times when organized violence was used to suppress and intimidate. This tactic plays into the hands of authoritarian movements, which seek to destabilize democratic institutions and erode trust in lawful governance. The goal is not just to create division, but to push society towards a state where extrajudicial actions become normalized, paving the way for more authoritarian control. This is why such narratives are particularly dangerous. They're not just about manipulating opinion, but about inciting real-world violence and unrest. So I've got a few historical examples. The Great Purge under the Soviet Union. So under Joseph Stalin's regime, the Great Purge from 1936 to 1938 was a campaign of political repression involving widespread arrests, forced confessions, and executions. Stalin targeted perceived enemies of the state, including members of the Communist Party, military leaders, and ordinary citizens, creating a climate of fear and paranoia. Another one is the Cultural Revolution in China, initiated by Mao Zedong in 1966. The Cultural Revolution aimed to enforce communism by removing capitalist, traditional, and cultural elements from Chinese society. The Red Guards, who were often young students, were mobilized to attack intellectuals, destroy cultural heritage, and persecute those who deemed counter-revolutionaries, leading to widespread chaos, violence, and suffering. Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. So Pol Pot led the Khmer Rouge, a radical communist movement that took control of Cambodia from 1975 to 1979. His regime sought to create a classless agrarian society, forcing urban populations into the countryside for brutal forced labor. The Khmer Rouge's policies resulted in the deaths of an estimated 1.7 to 2 million people through execution, starvation, and forced labor in what became known as the Cambodian Genocide. Intellectuals, professionals, and anyone deemed a threat were systemically targeted, plunging the country into horrific violence and suffering. The Brown Shirts, or the SA, were a paramilitary group that played a key role in Adolf Hitler's rise to power in Nazi Germany. They used violence and intimidation against political opponents. particularly communists and socialists, to suppress dissent and enforce Nazi ideology. Just before I continue here, there's quite a lot of background noise going on. Is that coming through on the recording?
I'm not hearing any at all. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not hearing
Oh,
it either.
excellent. Perfect. I've got my nephew upstairs, autistic and stimming, and there's plenty of noise coming from the rest of the house. So, but as long as it's not ruining the recording, we're good.
No, it's perfect. And Prince and I are used to NAFO Dave's son, so it wouldn't be a problem in any case, but we don't hear anything.
I
No
think
problem.
we're all, I think we're all good with that. Just understanding is a good thing.
Sounds good. So to add to the brown shirts, Kristallnacht, or the Night of the Broken Glass, was a coordinated attack against Jewish people and their property across Nazi Germany, November 9th and 10th in 1938. Synagogues were burned, Jewish businesses were destroyed, and thousands of Jews were arrested or killed, marking a significant escalation in the Nazi persecution of Jews. Across Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, the Cultural Revolution in China, and the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, there's some points that are common to them all, despite multiple ideologies mixed in. Each regime employed stochastic terrorism, the incitement of random individuals to commit violence against the liberal and academic classes. Intellectuals and educators were systematically targeted for promoting dissent or alternative ideologies. These regimes framed these groups as enemies of the state because they were dangerous to authoritarian control and threats to the rigid ideological purity of the regimes sought to enforce. Whether through violence, purges, or persecution, educated classes were considered subversive and crushed to eliminate any resistance to absolute power. So where does that put us for today? Well, Russia's war in Ukraine has strained its economy to the breaking point. Sanctions from Western countries have severely restricted its financial system, reducing access to international markets, crippling its exports, and cutting off essential supply chains. One of the most visible signs of Russian decline is the failure of its rail shipping infrastructure, which has been critical to transporting resources like oil and gas and military equipment. Russia is struggling to maintain control over its domestic infrastructure while also sustaining a costly war effort. Its financial reserves are shrinking, and its mighty military is now bogged down in a conflict with no end in sight. Facing collapse, Russia has turned to information warfare as one of its remaining tools of power. By ramping up disinformation, Russia aims to stabilize not just the US, but the Western world as a whole, exploiting division over issues like election integrity to foment unrest. This strategy is designed to both weaken Russia's enemies and distract the world from its own failing state. And this is being used as a tool to incite global conflict. The narrative of improvement in the United States through the destruction of institutions is not only intended to trigger civil conflict, but also spill over into global conflict. By undermining democratic systems in the US, Russia hopes to erode the US's ability to lead coalitions, provide aid to allies, or intervene in global affairs. This is critical for Russia as it faces increasing isolation and seeks to disrupt the global order that has been largely shaped by Western democracies since the end of the Cold War. Russia's disinformation campaigns are timed to maximize chaos. As its own economy crumbles, Russia is incentivized to create as much global disruption as possible, hoping to weaken the West and slow the momentum against its military and economic struggles. The more the West is distracted by internal strife, the less cohesive and strong it will be in responding to Russian actions, whether in Ukraine or other geopolitical arenas like Eastern Europe or the Middle East. The hope for Russia is that this chaos will spread beyond the US. If the US is preoccupied with internal division, other nations may follow suit, with extremist factions using similar tactics to destabilize their own governments. This, in turn, could create a global environment of unrest and conflict, which would play to Russia's advantage in terms of shifting the balance of power in its favor. It's a desperate gamble for a dying regime. For Russia, extreme disinformation efforts often represent a last-ditch effort to influence global politics. With its economic foundation crumbling, its geopolitical influence shrinking, Russia is relying heavily on disinformation to maintain relevance. It's not just about influencing US elections or domestic policy. It's about weakening the United States and all its allies to the point where they can no longer effectively oppose Russia on the world stage. Russia's attempts to fuel both civil and global conflict through disinformation are indicative of a regime in decline. As its power fades, it's using every tool at its disposal, including digital disinformation and cyber warfare, to try and pull others down with it. This ramp up in disinformation by an order of magnitude is a sign of desperation. Russia hopes to create enough chaos and division that it can survive by destabilizing others. The constant narratives of stolen elections in the United States was not just a domestic issue. It's part of a broader orchestrated effort by Russia to sow division, incite violence, and weaken the global order. Previously, by pushing this lie and amplifying it through disinformation channels, Russia was attempting to trigger both civil and global conflict in a desperate attempt to stave off its own collapse, and it appears to have succeeded. I'd like also to discuss the Overton window. It's a concept that describes the range of ideas, policies, or viewpoints that are considered acceptable in mainstream public discourse. This window can and does shift over time, moving to the left or right as different ideologies gain traction. Politicians, media, and social movements can influence this shift by normalizing ideas that were once considered extreme, bringing them into the realm of mainstream discussion. Good example of this is the United States currently legitimizing the idea of invading its neighbors with Greenland, Canada, and Panama on the chopping block. One of the things we have seen in recent years in the United States, far-right ideologies have pushed the Overton window towards more extreme views, especially in regards to immigrants and Jewish communities. Anti-immigrant rhetoric, often laced with xenophobia and racial resentment, has become more normalized in certain political and media spheres. This shift has contributed to an environment where violence and intimidation against immigrants, particularly those from Central and South America, and asylum seekers, has surged. For example, militia groups and far-right organizations have used inflammatory language, framing immigrants as invaders or criminals, which in turn emboldens violent actions like harassment, physical attacks, even mass shootings targeting immigrant communities. And as we've seen, the regime is also taking extreme actions to push into mass deportations, and we've seen that there's a lot of people getting caught up in this, whether they are legitimately illegal immigrants or just happen to have the wrong skin color. They're still getting rounded up and they're still getting processed for deportation, even if they are citizens. It has been happening, and there has been published stories about this. Similarly, anti-Semitism has resurfaced with alarming visibility. Conspiracies about Jewish influence in global politics and finance, often referred to as replacement theory, or linked to claims of controlling the media, have fueled acts of violence and intimidation. This rhetoric can be traced to incidents like the 2018 Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, where the shooter explicitly mentioned the Jewish organizations helping refugees as justification for the attack. The global rise of authoritarianism is intricately linked to disinformation campaigns that undermine democratic institutions. In the United States, narratives alleging, stolen elections and fraud within major institutions, as well as lies about Ukraine, have eroded public trust in electoral and normal governmental processes. A tactic mirrored in countries like Hungary under Viktor Orban, Brazil under Jair Bolsonaro, and Turkey under Erdogan. These regimes have employed disinformation to delegitimize opposition and consolidate power. The resurgence of disinformation under the renewed Trump administration has significantly strained democratic institutions in the United States. The propagation of false narratives, particularly concerning election integrity, has led to increased polarization and a decline in public trust. This internal discord not only weakens the nation's democratic framework, but also contributes to global instability, as a debilitated US is less capable of countering authoritarian influence abroad. The deliberate spread of disinformation has been a key factor in diminishing public confidence in the political system. Throughout the 2020 election cycle, for example, foreign actors, notably Russia, engaged in cyber efforts and online campaigns to influence public perceptions. These campaigns aimed to amplify mistrust in the electoral process by denigrating mail-in voting, highlighting alleged irregularities, and accusing the Democratic Party of engaging in voter fraud. Such actions confused and overwhelmed voters, leading to a significant decrease in confidence in the democratic process, and likely are a large contribution to why we had such a low turnout of people who would normally be voting more left in this last election. Now, there's lots that went on during this last election. I'm not getting into most of it because there hasn't been enough information published for me to be able to actually source it, and a lot of it's going to be just conjecture. So the internal discord fueled by disinformation does have broader implications beyond the United States. Well, a weakened U.S. is less capable of countering authoritarian influence abroad, uh, thereby contributing to global instability. The erosion of public trust in democratic institutions within the U.S. can embolden not only the current regime, but also other authoritarian regimes, which may view the internal challenges of the U.S. as an opportunity to expand their influence and undermine democratic norms globally. So Russia has been a central figure in amplifying these far-right movements, aiming to weaken democracies globally. By promoting disinformation, Russia seeks to sow discord and destabilize nations, thereby creating a fragmented international order. This strategy includes supporting far-right groups in Europe to undermine political support and destabilize democratic institutions. Social media platforms have evolved from simple communications tools into powerful instruments that shape public opinion and political discourse worldwide. Twitter, now X, under the leadership of Elon Musk, has become a central battleground for disinformation, as we all know. That's why we're here. With Musk's reluctance to enforce strong content moderation policies, enabling the proliferation of extremist rhetoric, misinformation, and conspiracy theories. These unchecked narratives have played a significant role in destabilizing democracies. Platforms like X, with their global reach, can amplify both domestic unrest and international conflict by rapidly spreading divisive and harmful content. This not only affects the political landscape within countries, but also influences international relations and public opinion on a global scale. In the United States, the complete lack of moderation on social media platforms like X has had dire consequences, particularly in the amplification of extremist groups and ideologies. The rhetoric circulating on these platforms has fueled political violence, contributed to mass polarization, and stoked unrest, culminating in events like the January 6th Capitol insurrection. These platforms, once tools for public discourse, have become breeding grounds for radicalization, where conspiracy theories and false narratives thrive unchecked. The ability of such platforms to instantly reach millions of users has made them potent tools for political manipulation, allowing false information to become mainstream and deeply influencing public opinion, often with violent repercussions. Internationally, X has played a similar role in spreading Russian propaganda and disinformation. Russian state-backed media has leveraged the platform to promote divisive and misleading narratives, aiming to undermine trust in Western institutions and sow discord amongst democratic allies. By allowing these narratives to proliferate unchecked, Musk's platform has contributed to the broader destabilization efforts orchestrated by the Kremlin. This unchecked flow of disinformation has been used to create rifts within NATO countries, particularly by exploiting existing political divisions in the US and Europe. The global reach of platforms like X has amplified the impact of these foreign interference campaigns, shaping global political dynamics in ways that destabilize both domestic governments and international relations. Musk's stance on free speech and minimum content regulation has made him a central figure in the debate about the balance between free expression, the responsibility of social media companies to curb harmful content. However, his approach has allowed for unchecked spread of harmful rhetoric, further polarizing political discourse and undermining public trust. Musk's philosophy, which supposedly prioritizes free speech over moderation, fails to address the complex realities of how disinformation can be weaponized. While advocating for open discourse, he has inadvertently created a platform where dangerous ideologies and harmful falsehoods can flourish, with serious consequences for democratic stability. In addition to his influence on social media, Musk has become increasingly involved in undermining American institutions, similar to how he first destabilized all content standards on X. He is contributing to the systematic dismantling of key government services through actions like his support for cryptocurrency projects such as Dogecoin. Musk has accelerated speculative financial behaviors that undermine public confidence in the traditional financial systems. More critically, his influence is extended to supporting efforts to weaken vital government agencies, including USAID, the IRS, the VA, and Social Security. By aligning with political figures who seek to dismantle these institutions, Musk's actions are contributing to the erosion of critical government functions that provide essential service to millions of Americans. This, combined with his push for deregulation and the promotion of unstable financial instruments, has far reaching implications for the stability and integrity of American governance. Ultimately, Musk's influence, both on social media and in the political realm, served to further the Kremlin's goals of destabilizing Western democracies, making the US more vulnerable to internal division and foreign manipulation. Trust in democratic institutions is a cornerstone of stable governance, yet is increasingly under attack by coordinated disinformation campaigns. The steady drumbeat of lies about election security, judicial integrity, and law enforcement credibility is designed to erode public confidence in these essential pillars of democracy. By repeatedly casting doubt on the legitimacy of elections, the fairness of courts, and the reliability of government agencies, far-right actors seek to create a climate of paranoia and cynicism. This tactic weakens the foundation of democratic governance, making it easier to consolidate power by positioning all opposition as corrupt or illegitimate. So the best documented target of these efforts has been the US election system. The false claims over widespread voter fraud, amplified by Donald Trump and his allies, have led to deep skepticism amongst a significant portion of the electorate. This manufactured doubt has justified aggressive voter suppression, intimidation at polling places, and efforts to install partisan election officials who can override legitimate results. By delegitimizing the electoral process, these tactics not only sow discord, but also lay the groundwork for authoritarian power grabs like the one we're seeing underway in the United States today, where only elections that favor the right-wing agenda are accepted as legitimate. The judicial system has also come under relentless attack, with courts increasingly framed as politically biased when they rule against far-right interests. Judges who uphold the rule of law are branded as activists or part of the so-called deep state, while courts that favor extremist agendas are celebrated as legitimate. This erosion of trust in the judiciary serves to dismantle an essential check on executive and legislative overreach. The same strategy has been applied to law enforcement, where the far right simultaneously embraces authoritarian policing tactics while painting agencies like the FBI as corrupt whenever they investigate right-wing figures. I am going to take a moment to mention something out of the news. Just yesterday, from the official White House X account, was Trump's sharing of the fake Time News article or Time News cover of "The King is Back," where, using the official White House channels, Donald Trump has outright called himself a king. Which, if that's not getting the Americans moving, I don't know what is. So these tactics mirror those used by authoritarian regimes like Russia, which have long sought to undermine Western democracies by eroding public trust in institutions. I just lost my spot there. 1 second. Russian disinformation campaigns work to amplify American divisions. They exploit and magnify existing distrust in democratic governance. By flooding social media with propaganda that questions the legitimacy of elections, the rule of law, and governmental authority, these efforts further fracture US society, making it more susceptible to manipulation. As American trust in institutions erodes, foreign adversaries find it easier to destabilize the country from within, weakening its ability to counter external threats. Ultimately, the goal of these attacks is not just to criticize institutions, but to replace them with a far-right power structure that holds unchecked authority. As Trump continues his assault on democratic norms with Elon Musk's help, the US grows increasingly vulnerable to foreign influence, particularly from the Kremlin. When Americans no longer trust elections, courts, or law enforcement unless they serve the interests of the far right, democracy itself is at risk. If this trend continues, the US will find itself in a situation eerily similar to other authoritarian regimes, where only one faction holds power Operation is delegitimized, and the country becomes a tool for external manipulation rather than a beacon of democratic stability. Economic instability is a powerful driver of disinformation, both as a tool of domestic control and as a weapon against foreign adversaries. As Russia grapples with financial collapse due to Western sanctions and the ongoing war in Ukraine, it has doubled down on disinformation campaigns aimed at destabilizing democracies. It has also doubled down on disinformation campaigns in Africa, trying to give itself as much influence there as it possibly can. By flooding social media with conspiracy theories, fueling anti government sentiment, and undermining trust, Russia seeks to weaken its rivals while distracting from its own economic failures. This strategy is not unique to Russia. Historically, authoritarian regimes facing economic decline have turned to aggressive propaganda and external conflicts to maintain control. So the Kremlin's disinformation efforts serve two key purposes. First, they shift domestic blame away from Russia's leadership by portraying the West as the real aggressor, responsible for sanctions and economic hardship. Russian media and state backed trolls amplify narratives that blame NATO, the US, and Ukraine for Russia's struggles, keeping the Russian public focused on external enemies rather than internal corruption and mismanagement. Second, they actively work to destabilize Western economies and democracies, ensuring that no single global power emerges strong enough to counter Russia's ambitions. By fueling internal division in the US and Europe, Russia weakens its adversaries from within, making coordinated action against its regime more difficult. This is made even worse when you get countries like Iran, North Korea, and China piling on, and also attacking the West because we're vulnerable and they might as well. So, a major component of this strategy is the economic manipulation of Western financial markets through speculative assets like cryptocurrency. Figures like Musk, whether knowing or not, and I think he's knowing, contribute to this chaos through erratic financial influence, such as pumping and dumping assets like Dogecoin. We watched Donald Trump do the same thing just a couple of weeks ago with Trump Coin, pulling a pump and dump scheme that built his followers out of around $2 billion by creating instability in traditional financial systems. Disinformation campaigns exploit economic fears, pushing narratives that government institutions, such as the Federal Reserve, the IRS, and Social Security, are failing or corrupt. This undermines faith in established economic systems and makes radical alternatives, often backed by bad actors, seem more appealing. The more people believe the US economy is on the brink of collapse, the easier it is for authoritarian narratives to take hold. At the same time, economic downturns provide fertile ground for conspiracy theories and extremist movements. When people are struggling financially, they become more susceptible to narratives that offer simple explanations and clear enemies. Russian disinformation plays directly into this vulnerability, promoting scapegoats such as immigrants, government officials, or global elites as the cause of economic decline. The far right in the US echoes these claims, pushing policies that weaken democratic institutions and benefit authoritarian regimes. This cycle of economic distress, disinformation, and political radicalization create a self perpetuating crisis that erodes democracy from within. As Trump and Musk continue dismantling American institutions under the guise of reform, they create conditions that serve the Kremlin's interests. The more divided and economically unstable the US becomes, the less capable it is of opposing Russian aggression or maintaining its global influence. Economic collapse and disinformation are not separate crises, but rather interwoven strategies used by authoritarian regimes to maintain power. If these tactics are not countered, the US risks falling into the same trap as other weakened democracies, where economic hardship fuels radicalization, trust in government erodes, and authoritarian forces seize control under the guise of restoring order. Disinformation thrives in societies that are already fractured by deep seated social divides, and the United States is really a prime target. Long-standing tensions over race, immigration, and economic inequality create a very fertile ground for bad actors, both domestic and foreign. Russia and far-right political figures in the US have mastered the art of amplifying these divisions, using disinformation to turn social grievances into existential conflicts. By continuously stoking outrage, they ensure that Americans remain focused on fighting each other rather than addressing the systemic issues that make them vulnerable to authoritarian influence. One of the most effective tactics is the weaponization of racial tensions. Russian disinformation campaigns have repeatedly sought to inflame racial divisions in the US, particularly through social media platforms like X and Facebook. During the 2016 election, Russian operatives created fake accounts posing as both Black activists and white supremacists, feeding both sides inflammatory content to heighten animosity. This strategy continues today, with far-right figures echoing these narratives to justify policies that erode civil rights and suppress minority voting power. The goal is not just to influence elections, but to make racial conflict a permanent destabilizing force in American society. Immigration is another key battleground. Disinformation campaigns portray migrants as an existential threat to American culture, jobs, and national security, fueling xenophobia and justifying extreme policies. It's not just a political strategy, but a long-term effort to shift societal attitudes towards authoritarian control. By convincing the public that open democratic policies lead to chaos, bad actors can push for harsher crackdowns, expanded government surveillance, and restrictions on civil liberties, measures that align with the far-right authoritarian playbook. Meanwhile, these narratives conveniently distract from the corporate and governmental failures that actually drive economic struggles, allowing the ultra-wealthy and powerful to avoid accountability. Wealth inequality also serves as a critical fault line. While economic hardship is a reality for millions of Americans, disinformation campaigns twist the narrative to pit the working class against fabricated enemies, rather than those truly responsible for systemic failure. Instead of directing anger towards the billionaires hoarding wealth or the corporations evading taxes, the far right and Russian-backed narratives push conspiracies about globalist elites, welfare queens, or deep state bureaucrats. Figures like Elon Musk, who publicly rail against government programs while benefiting them, play into this deception, positioning themselves as champions of the people while undermining institutions like Social Security, the IRS, and the VA that actually support working Americans. The danger of these tactics extends beyond politics. They're designed to keep the US in a state of perpetual internal conflict. A nation consumed by cultural and economic battles is less capable of resisting authoritarian encroachment, both domestically and internationally. As Trump, Musk, and their allies continue to dismantle democratic norms and social safety nets, they create conditions that directly benefit the Kremlin. If Americans remain divided, distracted, and distrustful of their own institutions, the US risks becoming not just politically unstable, but a breeding ground for the kind of social unrest that could escalate into civil conflict or be exploited in a larger geopolitical struggle. The spread of disinformation in the US is not just a domestic issue. It's increasingly intertwined with global terror networks, creating a dangerous ecosystem where extremist ideologies transcend beyond borders. Claims about stolen election, deep state conspiracies, and government betrayal, core narratives of the American far right, closely mirror those used by international terrorist organizations to justify violent action. The result is a growing overlap between domestic radicalization and global extremism, fueling a transnational movement of authoritarian, anti-democratic forces. At the heart of this strategy is Russia, which leverages disinformation to destabilize Western nations, weaken alliances like NATO, and incite violent actors into action. And I just want to mention one thing. When you hear mention of the deep state, or you hear mention of globalists or global elites, that in the speak of the far right means Jews. They straight up, it's just another way of saying Jewish people, and they are absolutely targeting them based on their religion. Far-right extremists in the US are not operating in isolation. They have direct ties to European fascist movements, neo-Nazi organizations, and even jihadist groups that share a common goal, the destruction of liberal democracy. We can see this in how Elon Musk has been openly supporting the AfD party in Germany. Disinformation campaigns, many of them originating from Russian troll farms, feed into these global networks, utilizing extremists or uniting extremists under shared narratives of ethnic nationalism, government corruption, and the supposed need for violent resistance. This cross-border radicalization has led to real-world consequences, such as the spread of white supremacist terror attacks, inspired by manifestos circulating online. The Christchurch shooter in New Zealand, for example, cited American and European far-right figures as his ideological influences, demonstrating how disinformation breeds international violence. This is another such example, but one of the most effective tactics in disinformation warfare is the use of stochastic terrorism. Again, that is once again the deliberate incitement of violence through mass media and rhetoric without issuing direct orders. By flooding social media platforms like X with false claims of election fraud, government tyranny, and immigrant invasions, far-right leaders and their foreign allies create an environment where individuals feel justified in taking violent action. When Trump tells his followers that the government is illegitimate, or when Musk amplifies conspiracies about a deep state controlling American institutions, they're lighting the fuse for lone wolf attacks. Also, militia uprisings and political assassinations, all while maintaining plausible deniability. Russia benefits immensely from this dynamic, as a fractured and unstable US is less capable of leading global resistances against authoritarianism. Every instance of right-wing domestic terrorism, from the January 6th insurrection to mass shootings inspired by racist propaganda, weakens American credibility on the world stage. Meanwhile, the spread of disinformation fuels skepticism towards US foreign policy, making it harder to rally allies against Russia's actions in Ukraine and beyond. Kremlin's ultimate objective is not just to create chaos within the US, but to incite broader global conflicts that will divide Western nations, weaken NATO, and pave the way for further territorial aggression. If left unchecked, the escalating cycle of radicalization and violence will not only erode American democracy, but also contribute to a larger global authoritarian resurgence. Disinformation is not just about political influence, it's a weapon designed to turn societies against themselves. It's designed to create conditions where violence feels inevitable. By failing to regulate social media platforms, allowing bad actors like Musk to amplify extremist rhetoric, and continuing to dismantle key institutions, the US is playing directly into Russia's hands. Without immediate action to counter disinformation and curb the rise of stochastic terrorism, the future might hold not just domestic unrest, but a broader collapse of the democratic world order. In response to the tightening grip of an authoritarian regime in the United States, citizens are employing a range of strategies to resist and push back against the erosion of democratic institutions. These efforts encompass legal challenges, public demonstrations, and acts of civil disobedience, and reflect a growing backlash against the billionaire class and their influence over government policies. So federal employees holding the line. Amid efforts by President Donald Trump and Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency to reduce the federal workforce, civil servants have initiated the Hold the Line, Don't Resign movement. This campaign encourages federal employees to remain in their positions, resisting unjust terminations and maintaining governmental operations. There are legal challenges against unlawful dismissals. Many terminated federal workers are contesting their dismissal through legal avenues, arguing that the layoffs are based on false pretenses and violate employment laws. These legal battles aim to uphold the integrity of public service and prevent the unwarranted privatization of government functions. We have seen public demonstrations and acts of civil disobedience. There have been protests targeting Tesla and Musk's policies. Nationwide protests have emerged, focusing on Tesla showrooms as a symbol of Elon Musk's political influence and cost-cutting measures affecting public services. A great example was this morning I saw a tweet of a Tesla dealership that had been spray painted with "Fuck Musk, Eat the Rich." Demonstrations under hashtags like Tesla Takedown and Tesla Takeover have occurred in multiple cities, expressing dissent against Musk's role in government and his support for far-right policies. In addition to organized protests, there's been instances of vandalism targeting Tesla properties, like I just mentioned, also targeting Tesla vehicles. With anti-authoritarian messages, these acts, while controversial, signify the depth of public frustration, serve as a form of resistance against perceived corporate overreach and authoritarianism. The influence of billionaires like Elon Musk in political and government spheres has sparked widespread public discontent. Critics argue that the concentration of wealth and power undermines democratic processes and leads to policies favoring the elites at the expense of the general populace. Public figures accused of perpetuating economic inequalities have become the targets of cultural movements. For instance, Disney-themed events have controversially featured images of individuals like Luigi Mangione, reflecting a complex mix of protest and pop culture. So I'd like to talk about Luigi Mangione a little bit. He's probably the most controversial folk hero of our age. He is the man who was charged with the murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, and he has garnered a significant following, with supporters viewing him as a symbol against corporate greed. Despite facing serious charges, Mangione has received substantial financial support for his legal defense, with donations exceeding $425,000. This support highlights a segment of the population's deep-seated frustration with corporate practices, particularly in the healthcare industry. His image has permeated social media and public events, with some portraying him as a folk hero. The phenomenon underscores the complex dynamics of public sentiment towards perceived economic injustices and the individuals who rightly or wrongly become symbols of resistance. They've also taken to using Luigi from the Mario Brothers as an icon of rebellion and dissent, which is wonderfully amusing to me. So these different forms of resistance reflect a society grappling with challenges posed by authoritarianism and economic inequality. Through legal action, public protest, and cultural expression, Americans are actively engaging in efforts to defend democratic values and challenge the disproportionate influence of the billionaire class. That said, with things continuing at the pace they have, the situation in the United States is escalating towards an inevitable stochastic retaliation, a phenomenon where individuals, radicalized by rhetoric and systemic injustices, commit violent acts without direct coordination, but as a result of increasingly hostile environment. As the country barrels towards deeper authoritarian control, the billionaire class, led by figures like Elon Musk, is dismantling essential institutions, undermining democracy, stripping social services, and fueling economic despair. In response, the growing backlash, ranging from vandalizing Teslas to direct attacks on corporate figures like Luigi Mangione's case, demonstrates that violence is emerging as a consequence of unchecked systemic destruction. So we're going to talk about the stochastic retaliation and the cycle of violence. Stochastic terrorism thrives when a widespread public anger is systemically inflamed by disinformation and corporate greed. As Musk and his allies hollow out federal institutions, cut services like USAID, the IRS, the Veterans Association, and Social Security, and they suppress dissent through monopolized media such as X, they're actively cultivating conditions for extremist acts. People who see no legal recourse begin to take matters into their own hands, whether by vandalizing symbols of billionaire excess or targeting key figures. These seemingly random acts of violence are not truly random. They are the predictable outcome of the sustained economic and political oppression. American institutions are on the brink. If the trajectory continues, the US is heading towards large-scale, violent civil conflict, fueled by deep social divisions, rising wealth inequality, and authoritarian control over public discourse. The erosion of trust in institutions means fewer Americans believe in legal solutions, and more begin embracing extra-legal methods of resistance. Luigi Mangione's transformation into a folk hero is a prime example. His act of violence, while legally unjustifiable, has been embraced by a public that sees corporate leaders as enemies, actively harming working class Americans. The more billionaires insulate themselves from the consequences of their actions, the more likely we are to see acts of retaliation escalate into a wider movement of direct action. Foreign powers will exploit the coming chaos. Russia and other adversarial nations recognize this chaos as an opportunity. Russian disinformation networks have long sought to destabilize the US by amplifying internal divisions, from stoking racial conflicts to funding far-right and far-left extremist groups. A weakened, divided America is in the Kremlin's best interests, and as civil unrest escalates, foreign intelligence services will work to foment an even greater schism. If the American people cannot stop the country from fracturing, the US risks becoming a battleground for proxy conflicts, much like Ukraine, Syria, or other destabilized states. Stopping this escalation requires urgent, large-scale actions. If Americans don't immediately unify against the complete creeping authoritarian takeover, the result is likely to be full-scale domestic insurgency, civil war, or worse, a total state collapse. Some of the necessary actions do include mass mobilizations, nonviolent but overwhelming public pressure against Musk-aligned policies through nationwide strikes and protests, continued lawsuits and bureaucratic pushback to prevent the complete dismantling of democratic institutions, media and counter disinformation campaigns. The public must reject X, formerly known as Twitter, as a primary news source, and support independent journalism. Protection of social services, direct actions required to defund or to defend vital institutions like Social Security, the IRS, and the VA from being dismantled under Musk's Doge program. International solidarity, building global coalitions to pressure the US government into reversing course before the situation reaches an irreversible tipping point. Now, I'm not sure this pressure will ever work because I don't think that Donald Trump is actually vulnerable to international pressure. I think he's going to go ahead and just do what he's doing, and I think he's doing it on purpose. Either way, the clock's ticking. If the American people fail to act decisively within the next year or two, there's a good chance that midterm elections just aren't going to happen, and the country's going to slide into full-scale violence. At present, acts of stochastic retaliation like vandalism, sabotage, and lone wolf attacks are warning signs of a coming storm. If these tensions remain unchecked, the US risks entering a period of prolonged domestic conflict, with foreign powers eagerly pulling the strings. The time to stop this is now. If the US descends into civil war under a fully entrenched far-right federal government, the result will be a brutal, asymmetrical conflict between a fascist regime and a fractured resistance. This will not be a traditional war, but a prolonged, bloody insurgency fought in cities, rural strongholds, and digital battlefields alike. The government will have all the tools of a modern surveillance state, but the people, if they resist, will have the numbers, the will, and the growing desperation of a nation pushed to the brink. Once democratic institutions are fully dismantled, part one of the plan comes to be, and that is the final consolidation of power. Resistance will shift from legal avenues to underground movements. The government, backed by billionaire oligarchs like Elon Musk, will systematically eliminate remaining opposition. Rigged elections and parliamentary one-party rule are a possibility. Any semblance of democracy will be maintained only as a show. Political opponents will be arrested, exiled, or assassinated. Dissidents and journalists will start to disappear. Musk's control over Starlink, Twitter, and key communications infrastructure will enable total surveillance, tracking down and silencing anyone who challenges the regime. Mass privatization of government institutions. Social Security, the VA, and Medicare will be gutted and handed over to corporate interests, forcing the poor and elderly into destitution. The IRS will be dissolved to allow unchecked wealth hoarding, while US aid and international aid programs will be repurposed for regime propaganda. This will mark the start of economic war on the population. The billionaire class will tighten its grip, using economic collapse as a tool to break resistance. Wages will be cut, rents are going to go up even further, and financial systems will be manipulated to push anyone outside the ruling elite into unlivable conditions. This stage, protests and legal challenges will be met with open brutality. The state will fully embrace the use of stochastic terrorism, encouraging their far-right militias, police forces, and corporate-backed paramilitaries to attack dissenters under the guise of law and order. I'm going to go back to the Second World War here for a minute. The example of Adolf Hitler's rapid consolidation of power in 1933 serves as a historical benchmark for understanding how swiftly democratic institutions can be dismantled. Appointed as Chancellor on January 30th, 1933, Hitler capitalized on the Reichstag fire on February 27th, 1933, to persuade President Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree the following day, suspending civil liberties and enabling the arrest of political adversaries. Subsequently, the Enabling Act was passed on March 23rd, granting Hitler legislative powers without parliamentary consent, similar to being able to just issue executive orders. By July 14th, 1933, the Nazi Party was declared the sole legal political party in Germany, effectively establishing a one-party state within approximately 6 months. Parallel context, President Donald Trump's second term has exhibited a concerted effort to centralize authority and diminish institutional checks and balances. Since his inauguration on January 20th, 2025, several key actions have been undertaken. First was the expansion of executive power. An executive order was signed extending White House control over independent agencies such as the Federal Communication Commission and the Securities and Exchange Commissions. This move, grounded in the unitary executive theory, has been controversial and is expected to face legal challenges. The dismantling of USAID. Administration has frozen foreign aid and dismantled the United States Agency for International Development, ceasing life-saving programs worldwide. This action reflects a shift towards a more transactional and coercive approach to international relations. The influence of Christian nationalism. Russell Vought, the head of the Office of Management and Budget, has been instrumental in guiding significant policy changes. A proponent of Christian nationalism, Vought aims to infuse Christian principles into all aspects of government, influencing the administration's approach to various policy areas. While these actions indicate a deliberate move towards consolidating power, the full extent of this consolidation is an ongoing process. The administration's effort to reshape the judiciary, weaken independent agencies, and centralize authorities are reminiscent of historical precedents where rapid power consolidation led to significant shifts in government structures. However, the unique complexities of a contemporary American political, legal, and societal frameworks suggest that the timeline and trajectory of such consolidation may differ from the historical examples. Phase 2 of the whole takeover, as peaceful avenues for change are eliminated, resistance will go underground and the country will fracture into violent conflict. Widespread sabotage and urban guerrilla warfare will be common. Infrastructure attacks on corporate data centers, Tesla facilities, state-controlled internet nodes will become routine. Resistance fighters will strike at symbols of the regime through vandalism, arson, and targeted assassination of key enforcers. If the United States military does not side with the side of the Constitution, rogue military units will break away. The Pentagon, fractured between loyalists and defectors, will see entire units refuse to obey orders. Some will join resistance groups, others will establish independent territories, and will further divide the country. There will be mass refusals amongst workers. Strikes and coordinated economic sabotage will paralyze supply chains. The billionaire class will respond with AI-driven automation and forced labor camps for the poor. Revolutionary folk heroes will emerge. Figures like Luigi Mangione will become symbols of defiance, inspiring a culture of direct action against billionaire overlords, whether through street ads and cyber attacks or bombings and shootings. These acts of resistance will spread like wildfire, pushing the conflict to its next deadliest phase. The federal government will respond by declaring all resistance forces to be terrorists, using overwhelming force, AI-driven surveillance, and likely lethal drone strikes on US soil to maintain control. The third phase would be a split in the military and full-scale insurrection. With the government waging war against its own people, the country will divide into armed factions. Some National Guard units and defecting military leaders will side with the resistance, creating national and regional strongholds of anti-fascist forces. Others will remain loyal to the federal government, using their firepower to crush rebellion wherever it flares up. The government will use starvation as a weapon, just as Putin did in Ukraine. The regime will cut off food, water, and medicine to rebellious cities, forcing mass displacement and deaths. Internment camps will be established for subversives. We already know they're being built. Foreign powers will seize the opportunity. Russia will back far-right elements to further radicalize the regime. China, seeing an opening, may provide covert aid to resistance groups or seize economic control over failing US infrastructure. NATO, paralyzed by political chaos, will probably be unable to intervene. So this war is not going to be fought in trenches or open battlefields. It's going to be door-to-door executions, citywide massacres, drone strikes on civilians. And then the final phase of this, which is exactly what the billionaires want, is the collapse into a neo-feudal corporate state. the regime ultimately wins, it won't restore order. It'll consolidate the US into a corporate-controlled techno-feudal state. It'll be a surveillance hellscape. Every move, every conversation will be monitored. AI-driven law enforcement will make arrests, possibly before crimes even happen. Corporate city-states, people like Musk, Bezos, and other oligarchs will divide the country into private fiefdoms, controlling all resources and essentially enslaving the working class. Climate collapse is likely to accelerate. With regulatory systems dismantled, environmental devastation is going to skyrocket. The poor will suffer while the wealthy retreat to fortified compounds and, safer parts of the country. If the regime loses, the country's still going to be in ruins. No functioning government left. Regional warlords or separatist enclaves, armed communities will carve out their own zones, fighting endlessly over what remains. The United States, once the world's dominant power, will become an irreversible failed state. And the final phase is a war without end. Without a mass movement strong enough to overthrow the regime before it fully consolidates power, the war never will truly end. The country will be a permanent battlefield, proving ground for corporate mercenaries, extremist militias, and foreign saboteurs. The dream of democracy crushed and the people enslaved or exterminated. This is the future, unless the American people decide to stop it before the point of no return. And that is tonight's signal and noise. It's a lot to dump out there all at once. Still with me, Robin?
Yeah, I was just going to hang myself on the back. Uh, uh, no, it's I do think it's important to point out that all of this is worst case scenario. That we have there are
It
off
is,
ramps
yes.
that we better damn well take before we get to this point. But yeah, it is definitely a cautionary tale.
Yes, it is. It is a worst case scenario. I am going, well, it's not a complete worst case scenario, but this is a scenario of what happens if it goes bad. And it's not pleasant. It's actually very ugly based on historical examples. And I don't want to see this happen. But we are in a place where this is the result of the misinformation and disinformation campaigns that have been spreading like crazy. And with the current regime in power in the United States, there's a very real possibility that things are going to go bad.
Yeah, and it is unfortunately one of the things we've seen demonstrated in the last month is exactly how quickly all of this can happen. I mean, I would never have imagined that even worst case scenario that so much could have been dismantled in such a short period of time, including our international reputation, our international, our international partnerships. So yeah, President Reagan many years ago said something, and I can't quote it exactly, but he basically said, people assume that you in a democracy and it's going to be passed on from one generation to the next. And he said that is not the case. If every generation has to work on it, we're one generation away from tyranny, and we're definitely seeing that possibility now, and it's pretty frightening.
It is. It's not pleasant at all. Welcome up, James.
Hey, Alex, completely depressing. Thank you. No, I do appreciate what you said. It really is depressing to hear, but I don't think it's beyond possibility that it is as you describe. I think there's a lot of ranges in there that can change, in the actual situation. But um, I do appreciate the urgency with which we have to reply. And people are still just, as I think Dryfly suggested, kind of taking it in, not understanding. It's pretty overwhelming. And a lot of people don't realize what the risk is yet. Some people are just delighted by what's happened because their side won and they're winning. And that's pretty disturbing to think that. So, anyways, I just want to say thank you for saying it. And now, did you bring enough alcohol for everyone?
Yes, but it's very low quality rum.
That'll work.
Now, part of this, the reason I look at it the way I'm looking at it is it goes back to 1999 when I was in Serbia. and I watched the country descend into, well, not even disintegrate into war around me. It was peaceful when I got there, and by the time I left, NATO was bombing the capital. And it's a big thing, especially at a young age, to run into something like that. And one of the things I discussed with my family there, and it was like, okay, this is happening here. You've got this long history of all these different conflicts. It's not like that in Canada. And they just turned to me and were like, yeah, we always said that could never happen here either. And that was a disturbing thing to be faced with as a teenager. And honestly, it's something that I took to heart. And it's something that I've kept in mind for my entire life here, because there's a certain level of complacency, and part of what I'm doing is trying to shake people out of it. If even one person heard this tonight and it caused them to question and give their head a shake, then it's accomplished its mission. Because there's a lot of people who are just, they don't have the energy to engage, or they don't have the wherewithal to engage, or they think it's hopeless, and it's not. And there are lots and lots and lots of ways you can protest, and lots of things you can do, even without having to go out and get directly involved and put yourself at risk. And it's yeah, it's everyone needs to be doing something, or they're going to end up having to do something. And I think that's the basic dichotomy we're dealing with here. If you don't choose to do something, they're going to choose for you to do something, whether you like it or not.
And one of the issues that I find, I think we're going to have to figure out how to handle this. I think you're right. I think Trump, on an elemental level, really doesn't care whether people like him or not. He's got a mission in his head of what he's going to do, and he doesn't care what anybody thinks. Um, at the same time, though, a lot of his supporters, especially the MAGA types in Congress, they also want to get reelected. And as I note here that his poll numbers have declined precipitously in the last month. That's an area that may have some hope, because he can't. There's a limit to what he can do if he doesn't have support among lawmakers in Congress. I just must say, it gives me a little chuckle to see how much higher President Zelensky's popularity ratings are than Trump's. But that's just an aside. Thank you.
It is entertaining, absolutely, and it's well, it goes to show that, even the honeymoon period of having had your guy win only lasts so long. And I think there's a lot of people in the United States now waking up to the fact that Trump is not going to help them in any way, like like they believe they might. He's not interested in helping people. I think the real key is going to come when he fully dismantles the VA. You're suddenly going to have a lot of veterans who no longer have health care. And I think that's going to be a major miscalculation on his point. And I think it's going to be one that's going to lead to some extremely unpleasant circumstances. Veterans don't take terribly kindly when you start screwing over other veterans. And they are the people who know what they're doing. As January 6th proved, a large mob can do quite a bit. But on that day, if there had been 100 reasonably trained people in that crowd with, decent battle rifles, they could have put down everybody in the house that day. They would have been no problem to break in, smash their way in, and just kill the legislators. There was nothing to stop them.
Yeah, I mean, that is something, though, that gives me a little bit of hope that those people were really not organized and not very bright about the whole thing. It's not as though they were really a coherent resistance at that point. Hopefully, you can't count on it staying that way, but a lot of what seems to be going on, especially among those the MAGA types, they've gotten so down the rabbit hole in terms of it being emotional about everything, that they're not able to make plans and take steps to get somewhere, which is a very good thing in this case.
I would agree. It's having them less empowered is a good step in the right direction. My largest concern is that the extremist elements in the left, by and large, reject violence in almost all forms. And it is the most frustrating thing on earth. It's one of my favorite authors, actually. I just listened to an audiobook of his the other day, and it was a just a little snippet of a conversation where there's a bunch of, for lack of a better word, bad guys looking to kill a resistance movement. And the leader is speaking to a 5-year-old girl, saying, you can't be poking your head out like that and opening fire. That's insanity. You shouldn't even be thinking about killing people. And she responds, why should I stop thinking about killing people? Have they stopped thinking about killing me? And it's a very poignant thing to say, especially given the context of what's going on today, because everybody's on the chopping block, and it doesn't matter if you're a pacifist. That's not going to stop them.
Oh yeah, I mean that certainly is the case. I grew up in a pacifist church, and that's one of the things you come to grips with very early on, that you can be as pacifistic as you want. If somebody's coming at you determined to kill you, you're just helping them out, honestly. So
Yeah, exactly. And it's just one of those realities. Like I know I really lost my shit on Incognito about a week back in having a conversation there, and I do once again apologize for that. But it's just a frustration with the people that I see who are like, oh man, this is all taking over and we're all going to be under a fascist dictatorship soon. And I'm like, arm up. They're like, no, I would never own a gun. Then what good are you? You're just going to be going along with the fascist government then, if you're not in a position to do something to fight
yeah,
back. And you can get out in the streets today, and I can tell you every single one of the ones that I've had that conversation with aren't in the streets.
yeah, and it's not something to hope for, which I understand, which I know you're not. But I think of the difference. I think since the full scale invasion started, I've thought a lot about the difference between Ukrainians and Jews. Both the Ukrainians and Jews are facing a very, very similar ideology that intends to destroy them, a genocidal ideology based on some of the same writers. And the Ruski Mir is based on not Nazi-like authors, but on actual, honest to God, German Nazi writers. But what the difference is Jews were not armed. They were not organized. They had no military culture or no ability to have any kind of a military. Whereas Ukrainians had that Cossack tradition, and also they had an army, and that's what made the difference. So I think it's those of us who live in representative democracies where basically there's peace. It's very easy to just dislike having weapons. And as I said, having grown up in a peace church, I'm very uncomfortable with weapons, but I do see that the time comes you're better off armed than not.
And it's one of the things that I look at. It's not something you can just pick up and use. It's not like the movies where someone who's never used a gun before is just going to know what they're doing. You don't If you've never used one, you don't know how to operate it properly, and you don't know how difficult it can be to get shots on target well under pressure. And a little bit of practice goes a very long way. Like I'm not some nutbag militia survivalist. I own precisely 2 firearms. One is a shotgun that is used for duck hunting and clay shooting, and one is an old lever action 30-30 rifle for taking down deer. And that's it. I'm not armed up with, AR-15s and AK-47s, and I no longer have smoke grenades kicking around. Did at one point for a project, but other than that,
Oh boy.
I see
Yeah,
the
I was going to
shock
say
there.
I'd love to pursue that a little part, but let's not.
There was a theater thing that I did where I was playing a militia sort of bad guy for this show, and one of the part of the thing, it was an outdoor show, and part of it involved me actually pulling and tossing smoke grenades. So I bought the kind that you'd use for playing paintball, and use those to do it.
All right. I wanted to ask you something about this stochastic. What was this? What was this stochastic terrorism?
Stochastic
Terrorism. I couldn't
terrorism.
remember. Does that include also the phenomenon we're seeing in Ukraine of young people, particularly being drawn in by FSB and encouraged to commit acts of violence, either mostly for monetary rewards, many of whom end up getting blown up in the process because the Russians have no intention of actually ever paying them. But is that included in this, or was that a different category?
That'd be a different category. That is more direct action. That is somebody actually taking the effort to, convince someone to take active measures. Stochastic terrorism is much more to whom it may concern. It's a very wide berth, and it throws out there, and it's just to get people pissed off. And it's about fostering an environment where individuals feel like they have no power and no hope, and then giving them an outlet and an escape, like a scapegoat that they can target specifically to let it out. You see this a lot in the incel movement, which is also arguably a part of the far right. The incel movement feeds directly into the far right pipeline through the men's rights activists and the pickup artist groups as well. And for those who don't know, incel, the term means involuntary celibate, and it is a group of individuals who gather in their forums online and more or less blame women for the problems of the world and believe that they personally are entitled to have sex with beautiful women, and they are oppressed because women don't want anything to do with them. And they wonder why when they're blaming women for all the
Yeah,
world's
they sound like a
problems.
really
It's
attractive people. I don't understand it.
Yeah, they're not an attractive people, but they are often terrorists, and there's been quite a few terrorist actions that have come from that. And it's chilling. If you ever get a chance to watch the interviews with Alex Minassane, he is the gentleman who in Toronto took a Ryder truck and drove it through a couple of hundred people in Toronto, Ontario, down one of the busiest thoroughfares in the city. Absolutely brutal, and he's not delusional. He's not crazy. He's able to lay it all out exactly what he was thinking and why and how he did it and what he hoped to accomplish. And this is a rational, sane person who decided to commit mass murder because the echo chambers he was in made it seem like it was the only option for him. And that's gross.
Yeah,
Like, so
this
gross.
is a technique that this is a fascist technique that's used over and over. I mean, we see that the Nazis um, focused everyone on Jews. If only we attack Jews, get rid of Jews, everything will be fine. The Russians now, it's Ukrainians, or it's NATO, or it's the United States, but there's never any problem inside the group, and the group can be these incels, the group can be a country, but there's never a problem inside. It all's the fault of something on the outside, which if only it could be destroyed, then everything would be fine inside again. It's very insidious, and it plays to people's vanities because nobody wants to admit that anything wrong with themselves. And this way, this way it's not. It all focuses on the outside. It absolves them of any kind of responsibility for anything that's wrong because it's all the fault of the outside person. It's very it's very easy for people to get pulled in like that. It's a feel good kind of thing for people who are able to focus all of their problems outside, and they just have to destroy that person or that group, and it'll be fine. It's frightening.
You could not have said anything that was more correct there. It is absolutely true. And there's a particularly nasty combination going on in the United States right now, especially among the right, the MAGA voters. Not all of them, but a good chunk of them, where ignorance that combines with more ignorance, and it's leading to very bad results, because not only do these people want a simple answer to their problems, they can't understand a complicated answer. You ever say to them, well, that's a complicated issue, like, no, it's not, just get rid of the immigrants, we'll be fine. And suddenly they're surprised when their, fruits and vegetables cost 3 times as much and they can't get them. But it's not just that, it is also a fact that a lot of these people have no idea how anything works. Like, compared to the other people around me, I am extremely well read. I am extremely aware of the world. And I know just enough to know I don't know shit. And these people around me think they're experts, and I can run circles around them easily, despite the fact that I know I have no idea what the actual bits and bobs of, administering government programs is. But I know they're more complicated than these people think they are. And it's a big thing, because it's multiple factors that come together to really become a perfect storm of awful behavior over time.
And
And
how
mhm.
much do you think this goes hand in hand with the destruction of traditional morality? And I don't mean that as a code word for anti-gay stuff or whatever. I just mean the morality that most of us grew up with, which is, where you treat people with respect, and civility or whatever. It seems to me, I mean, I know, in living in New York City, things have gotten a lot more what's the word? I mean, brutal's not quite the word, but people are not nice to each other anymore. I mean, there isn't the basic assumption that you treat other people with respect and with politeness and whatever is gone. And I wonder how much that feeds into all of this.
I think probably quite a lot. There's Since the internet became omnipresent in people's lives, and since social media really started kicking up into high gear, like, there was a time where social media was kind of a small thing, and then there was a time where it was actually used to connect with people. And then sometime, my guess is around 2014-ish, it started to really, really drift. And now we've got a complete lack of civility in online discourse. People use anonymity to hide behind it. And I think that's starting to bleed into real world conversations too. Of course, massive partisanship has a lot to do with that too. And not necessarily just political partisanship either. In groups versus out groups of any type can lead towards, uncivilized and unempathetic behavior towards others. And I think it's important to, remind people of that, and remind people that treating others well is an important thing. I see Adam's up, my fellow Canuck. Welcome, Adam.
Dobre dzień, excellent discussion. I just wanted to say, imagine being Zelensky right now and trying to temper your statements about the things, the Kremlin talking points that the orange mango Mussolini is spewing. And and one of your data points that you have to consider is the safety of your citizens who are refugees in the United States. And if you go too hard on the guy, so I'm sure that's being considered, and it kind of breaks my heart. That's just something that popped into my head. And yeah, the morality thing, the traditional values that many MAGA people seem to think that Russia represents, which is just completely false, as we know from the stats about divorce rates, churchgoers, abortion rates per capita, and the like, alcoholism, all of these things. Um, in the end, it's just so that's fake news. As far as how fascism and scapegoating works, the morality is just a veneer. It's just a cloak. And it is about exactly what you were saying in terms of releasing those energies of a broken society onto a scapegoat. And yeah, The whole family values thing is a veneer, and I will prove it by saying they elected the least family values president that you could possibly fucking think of. Dropping the mic, driving home, Slava Ukraini, love you guys.
Heroyam Slava. Yeah, I was thinking, I hadn't thought about that with Zelensky, that he does always have to think about Ukrainians, refugees, and or just Ukrainians in this country, for example. And the problem is, I think he was right in saying something. You have to let Russian talking points go unanswered and or not pointed out is a really not a good thing. And it was what he said, considering what Trump has been spouting. I think that Zelensky's approach, what he said was very measured, but of course, calling to saying the emperor has no clothes is not a way to get appreciation from someone like Trump, who does not want to be called on anything, no matter how outrageous he is, and surrounds himself with people who never contradict him. So when you to have Zelensky, who he sees as leader of a minor Eastern European country, hardly a country. Yeah, Putin told him it's not a real country anyway. That he would have the nerve to treat Trump as an equal, which is Zelensky doing Trump a favor, treating him as an equal, honestly. But that was just something he could not cope with. But I think Zelensky is right. He has to be pointed out, otherwise people will start to believe some of this tripe. Anyway, back to you, Alex.
No, absolutely. And the moral values. I'm trying to find the information again. My laptop is ultra slow, but so I don't have the exact numbers overall, but I remember it was a huge percentage of Russian women. But at any given time, Moscow itself has between 30 and 150,000 women engaging actively in prostitution. That is a significant portion of the population, and if I remember correctly, I think it was 80% of Russian women will engage in at least one act of prostitution before the age of 25. But I will correct that when I find the exact numbers. But you want to talk about traditional moral values? Russia is not it. And I see that Will came up. Will, welcome. Always glad to hear from you.
Hey, Alex. Yeah, I mean, look, all the absolute hyper disinfo that's going on worldwide. You were asking about. I mean, you were talking about what Zelensky's doing. I think Zelensky's doing a great job managing the info side, but he also and Ukraine shouldn't get caught up in. Um, shouldn't get caught up in the Trump news cycle either. It's really important, and I think there might be some credence to the person who said um, Zelensky coming out and saying that Trump's living in a disinfo world. There's nothing wrong with pointing out fact like that, right? There's nothing wrong with him saying that, and that may have set Trump off on his latest absolute rampage of spew, but that letting Trump go and not further getting involved in the back and forth is probably the best idea. Zelensky needs to be speaking to his people right now. Zelensky should, in my opinion, but he doesn't need my advice, should return now with the fourth year of this war starting again so shortly to address the people at home. If America is going to block Ukrainian refugees and whatever, now is the time for Zelensky, I believe, to be calling people home, calling people who were refugees and worried that they were going to, lose everything immediately. He should be calling those people home where he can to fill their factories, fill their manufacturing capabilities, and rallying his own country so that they know that uh, that they still have the will to make it even on their own, and let the Trump rage machine turn off people, because you would see that he's turning off people in America. He's obviously turning off Europeans, and what we need to see is Europe and Britain and look at the great stuff that's coming out of Japan and South Korea today in relation to standing up for liberal democracy, and we need to see more of that. But beyond the strong words, we now need to see just Zelensky needs to focus on speaking to people at home and stick to his knitting. Things are still going very, very poorly for Russia on the battlefield. It's a stalemate, yes, but their losses are still far beyond unsustainable, and the strategic strikes being carried out on them are going to continue to pay dividends. But they've just got to stick to their knitting and not be caught up in the rage machine that's running 24/7 out of Washington.
Yeah,
I didn't hear what happened in Japan there today, actually. Can you just give a one sentence quick summary?
Yeah, so the minister, let me find the guy's name. I think he's a foreign minister. Um, let's see, cabinet minister. So he's the head of the prime minister's cabinet. Uh, just gave a very clear, distinct statement from the cabinet that said Zelensky is the legitimate, democratic, the leader of Ukraine. Russia started the war with its invasion of Ukraine, and Japan will continue to provide uh, uh, financial aid and support to Ukraine as it can. Clear, concise. What we like to see what we like to see out of diplomats: clear, concise, and not inflammatory language that further buttresses support for liberal democracy.
yeah, that is wonderful. It's nice to hear. It's nice to hear diplomats who cut right to the heart of the matter and are on the right side of it. One of the things I wanted to mention very quickly, and then we'll go to Adam and Lexicon, is one of the problems with getting people back into Ukraine, as I know a number of people in the position was they might go back, but if they're men, of conscription age, it's a really serious question. Do they really want to risk? Going back and being mobilized. And obviously, Ukraine needs more soldiers. That is. But at the same time, as there are people in Ukraine who are exempt from service because they work in critical industries, um, it'd be very touchy to try to do this with bringing people back in. But it would probably open up a lot of possibility of a lot of talented people coming back into the country if they knew that they weren't going to get mobilized right away, that they have things to contribute, important things to contribute to the country, that they would be able to do that work rather than being brought into the army. I don't know how you do that, but I think that's part of an issue. Anyway, I'll hand it back to Will if you want to respond, and then we're going to go to Adam, Lexicon, and Brian.
Oh no, that's the go on.
Adam.
Ay, ay, ay. Yes. I think Zelensky's doing a great job, and I think he is talking more to his own people. And I think he's doing a good job of threading that needle in terms of not letting those stinky absurdistan orc lies, just sit in the zeitgeist without any response, but also to not be tangled in that news cycle, like Will said, because that's just going to polarize the thing more. Because there are MAGA folk who, for whatever reason, are MAGA and do support Ukraine. And that'd be a quick way to lose that support, I'm sure. So, as always, showing himself to be an amazing speaker, an amazing communicator.
And the key is finding that line between arguing with somebody and just hitting them with your best NAFO meme.
Yeah, that's true. I was talking with one of my Ukrainian teachers this morning, and she did not vote for Zelensky. She said she didn't like him at the time. She thought, comedian, we need somebody serious. But she said at this point, she said if he runs, no question, she's voting for him. And I think that a lot of people in Ukraine are feeling that way. He certainly has earned a lot of respect and affection from his people for the way he has handled all this. I just thought it was sort of interesting. Although he won with over 70% of the vote the last time, and I know several people who from Western Ukraine who did not vote for him, who definitely are strong supporters now. So it's interesting. We'll go back to you, Adam, and then we'll go to Lexicon and Brian.
I just also wanted to point out how it was funny that before Mango Mussolini started his Kremlin spouting musings, Zelensky's approval rating was sitting at about 54%, and then the last few days has shot up to 58%. So he's actually gained support back home from the wise.
Trump remains
Hilarious.
a master strategist too. I still think somebody really should start a Darth Trump, good Twitter account. Anyway, okay. Yeah.
When you mentioned 58%, just going to say that it was a study of university students that's reported in Moscow, and it was 58% of women under the age of women 20 years or younger that reported that they had engaged in prostitution for money at least
Good
once.
Lord. Wow.
So by age 20, over half at least once.
Amazing. Those traditional Russian values are really unique. Wait,
They are. Over to Lexicon, then Brian.
Well, moving smartly back to the previous tangent. Yeah, with you, Robin, my engine buddy is exactly the same two views you mentioned, and props to Adam. I agree with you. I think Zelensky is taking his, as always, had the responsibility to answer, clear the fog, and he did, and he is speaking to his people, and nobody needs to teach Zelensky anything about timing. Not just comic, but war timing too. I think so. Our world's kind of turned around in I don't know, 24 or 48 hours, and it seems to me that what we're seeing now is like it's really clear that Moscow. It was Lavrov or Peskov said absolutely refuse any kind of force. You can call it peacekeeping. You can call it I-4. Nothing. Absolutely refuses in Ukraine. Second, Trump will not stand up to anything from Moscow, and certainly not to that. Third, what Zelensky has shown us, Ukraine will not accept a phony deal. That is any deal that does not have this ironclad. We've learned to call it security guarantees. He means an I-4, an implementation force with any name. And fourthly, Europe has seen what Ukraine long ago knew, that the US is no longer a reliable ally, or the US with this government is not a reliable ally anymore. I mean, effectively, NATO is dead in that sense. Article 5 is certainly dead. And so what's happening in Europe, and I think it's really helpful for us to keep on looking at the stuff coming out of on all the movement going on, plus Europe coming across the Atlantic this weekend. Europe is going to have to stand up a force, because if America won't, Europe has to. There's no two answers to this. And then they're having all the agonizing discussions about all the ways that they can't finance it, won't finance it, have to finance it. More and more people, including who was it now? It was just one of the Baltics who just said, get 200 billion out of the frozen assets. I mean, they could finance it like easily. And I have mentioned since last night that it's very clear it's the European Central Bank that is holding up these assets, and that decision ought to be taken out of their hands by the politicians. But finally, after all that agonizing, the point is that there are 400,000 soldiers in the field who are holding the line and the head right now. And if you need to hold the line, the obviously cheapest, most effective, and most rapid way to deter Russia, well, is to get in there, move the money and move the stuff. The Danish prime minister had just said to her government, bust away the spending break, and buy.
Oh, sorry, I accidentally just muted you, Lexicon.
Oh, right. What was my last line? Did I get to the Danish prime minister?
Yeah, you did.
You're saying Bye, bye, bye.
Okay, yes, buy. So it's billions, it's up to 2033, but it's moving it now. And the point is very clear from all of those different financial and military moves that we're looking at as the fog begins to dissipate in Europe, is that a win in Ukraine is the very best way to do it, and that it'll be faster and it deters. What deter means is you don't wait to what, because I've heard a lot of discussion today in Europe about the things that are going to happen. There is no way we know that Putin is stopping, and there's no way that Trump is stopping him, and all of the havoc it's going to wreak. But the point is, we don't need to go there. The point is that I think that all the focus needs to be, and certainly those of us who are in Europe and in Canada, it's on us. But people in the US as well need to focus on, Ukraine must win, arm Ukraine to win now, and defeat Russia in Ukraine, because to deter Russia, it has to, well, Sir, what's his name? Richard Sheriff, that retired general, has said Putin will not agree to any security guarantee, any force, unless he's forced to. That is, he's got to get a bloodied nose. Well, the fastest way to bloody his nose, i.e., deterrence, is that Ukraine wins now, wins, this year. Defeat Russia in Ukraine so as not to have to defeat Russia all over the place, in the Baltics, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Europe, further than Europe. All of that agonizing, we can we can do so much better by dealing with it here and now. I mean, you're coping with a malignant cancer. So to me, that's where I was talking to Robin earlier today, and we were talking about what is concrete, what is immediate, what is practical and practicable, actionable, as they call it in America. And so to me, that's the conversation to have. That's certainly my focus. And yeah, I think that the stuff happening right now is this weekend in Washington, this coming week, the diplomatic and military discussions in Europe and in the transatlantic space is really essential. And I'll be pushing my government. Back to you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Lexicon. One of the things too that I think we're beginning to round the corner on is people have to, the governments have to stop being afraid of Russia. Russia is, a decidedly second-rate power. They do have nukes, but we've seen that it's very unlikely that they're actually going to use them. And the point is, the more that we let them push people around, it's disproportionate. They push people around as though they had a lot more clout in the world than they actually do. I think the Europeans are beginning to understand this. And a point of fact, as someone mentioned before, if Europe were to make a concerted effort and get together and aim their all of their group efforts against Russia, Russia would not be able to stand. They're not omnipotent at all, and I hope we're turning a corner on this finally. Yeah, looks good.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. This is talk about a paper tiger. There has been, because of that tactic that Kaya Kallas has talked about, they bluster, they storm, and we can see this in Putin. We all know it, and Lavrov, and so they bluster and blow up firecrackers and so on. But yeah, if you hold steady, the fact is that they've also never been as weakened. Their armed force has never been as weakened, probably at any time since the Cold War, as it is right now. And that is entirely because of Ukraine. And so if we don't leverage this, if we don't capitalize on the strategic situation right now, we would be extremely foolish, like to the point. Anyway, we've seen a lot of foolishness, but this is really our 1938. And if we want an armed Czechoslovakia with the best arms, the best troops, the best AI, best IT, computer, industrial powerhouse, in Europe, to be fighting against us because it's been what, dragooned anyway, run over by this unworthy foe, then all we need to do is remain stupidly, obdurately, stubbornly refusing to recognize it.
Well said, Lexicon. Well said. Brian?
Yeah, first of all, good to see the homies in here. Good to see the homie Adam, my co-host, hombre, late night hombre, and great point, lexicon about they need to stand up the freaking force ASAP. I love that phrase, stand it up, because that's exactly what they need to do, and they need to do it quickly. Uh,
And
yeah, I can go
Canada
on a whole.
with them, Canada and Europe.
Yeah,
Wake up,
exactly.
Canada.
Everybody's got to get helmets and uniforms on and get some guns going, man. I mean, that's that's it's the wake up call, man. This is like just 1938 exactly. Um, I I have to bring this encounter to the group's attention. So I'm driving to Florence, South Carolina, and I had to make a stop at a gas station, and I pulled up next behind a guy in a car that had a U.S. Army paratrooper license plate frame on the back of his car, and he had a Bronze Star license plate. So this guy was awarded the Bronze Star, for combat, for combat. Um, so that's not. They don't just hand those out. So we were at the gas station. I just thanked him for his service. And just we were talking. He's a reservist now, but he's done multiple tours of duty in Afghanistan, I guess, Iraq. And so I brought it up, hey, what do you think about, what's going on with Ukraine and stuff? And it was really interesting what he said. He said that he really was really feeling bad about the loss of life. He just said, the killing's got to end over there. That's just insane what's happening. He did express a lot of admiration for the Ukrainians. What he said was that it's amazing what they've been able to do. He wishes, and this is almost an exact quote, that he wished that at least some of that intestinal fortitude that the Ukrainians have shown would have been transferred over to the Afghans, because after 20 years over there, and they just folded quickly, and he um, it's clear that he and the people that he served with were very embittered um, by that circumstance, and were just really upset that after all these lives and after all this money and all this time, that you guys you know couldn't hold it together and just collapsed after we left. That he felt like that was uh, just really embittered by that. He kept coming back to this analogy, and I've heard this from online from troll accounts on here recently as today. They keep coming back to this, and even another person who's not a troll that I know from that I interact with on Facebook. This idea that that Putin has an argument because of this NATO encroachment, and the exact analogy that he used was, would we accept missiles being placed, Warsaw Pact missiles being placed in Canada? Would we accept that? And he directly used the Cuban Missile Crisis as an analogy. And I tried to slip it in there. It's like, well, I mean, it's not really the same thing, because I mean, these guys were, invaded the Holodomor. I mean, they killed a bunch of Ukrainians. I mean, been trying to subjugate Ukraine for a long time. But it's hard, you're standing there in a gas station. You can't get into a detailed discussion of that. But he said, and he specifically came out and said that, that he felt like Putin's a scumbag and can't be trusted. So he had no love for Putin at all. But his thing was, and then the other thing he said towards the end of our conversation was that the money aspect of it, and he specifically brought up the fact that there are things that they want to do in the U.S. military on the reserve side that they can't do because they don't have the funding. And so he's like, well, all right, so we have the funding to like send to Ukraine, but we can't like fund our basic operations on some of the things we want to do. So, but he was really nice, and I actually invited him to come to Volia Radio, and he's familiar with Twitter Spaces. He's familiar with that. He's like, yeah, I know the plan. I know that. And he asked me multiple times, and I said Volya, Volya. I said, yeah, it's a Ukrainian word. Now, he actually has spent time talking with Ukrainians, working with Ukrainians as part of his duties. So, um, yeah, he didn't have any ill will at all towards Ukraine people. So I just thought you would find that interesting and he said that, like, there was someone else that he worked with that was an officer that brought up that Canada Warsaw Pact analogy and Cuban Missile Crisis analogy, and sort of assigning at least a little bit of agency towards Putin. So yeah, so I just thought you guys would be interested in that because and this is a regular dude that actually has some military experience, has been overseas, and yeah, that was his perspective. So I just thought that was something you guys would be interested in hearing.
Yeah, that's
Back
great,
to you.
and it really does point out too how important it is to talk to people. I mean, my kids always used to get mad at me because I talk to anybody standing online in the grocery store. I'll always talk to the person next to me, but you really can do a lot of good, and there are people of goodwill who just don't understand the whole situation. I've run into that with some people I know that, you spend a little time. Giving them the correct information, and and if you remain calm and moderate about it, which we try to do, you really can make inroads. And yeah, laugh lexicon. You know me too well. I try to save my frothing at the mouth for over here. Anyway, but
No,
I
I didn't mean
yeah.
that. I didn't mean that. But if
Okay.
when you're done, if you give me the chance, I will say something.
Okay, good enough. Yeah, anyway, so well, I mean, just keep it up is what is my message is, we if we each work in our little area, talking to people and getting the word out, it adds up after a while. It's like the fundraisers that we sponsor here, a whole lot of $10 donations, and pretty soon we've got a significant amount of money to help. For example, SBU Alpha that needs winter clothing still. That's up in the nest. If you feel like a little rage donation to feel yourself better, to feel better about all of this, SBU Alpha is a really, really good place to do it. But yes, back to you, Lexicon.
Yeah, it raged. I got buyer's remorse practically because somehow I don't know, the American dollar is going down vis-a-vis the ruble and stuff, but it not but the vis-a-vis the Canadian dollar, it's way up there. So I ended up after I generously gave my I don't know, 3% to cover my PayPal or something and 15% tip. Was it 15? Oh my God. Anyway, it ended up being about twice as much as in Canadian dollars as the US dollar amount I gave, but it didn't really have remorse at all. But that you got to be enraged to do that. That argument that you got to see that how threatened Putin felt with all this years, the decades of NATO expansion it's amazing. As soon as you hear it, that's people, whoever they are, that are getting it from the Russian disinfo space. But I mean, totally different from the man that you talked to. I've mentioned before, a very elderly veteran, distinguished medical doctor. I mean, I'm telling, when I say elderly, this man was in the war. You won't believe me. That's because the man's over 100 years old. We talk, and he's sharp, and we talk, and he has said to me, but can you see Putin's perspective of this NATO surrounding him? And, I've thought about it over and over again. I won't berate somebody of this, an elder like this, but I think to myself, and I will find a refined way to say this, but is is it because Putin feels threatened that they give an order that it is policy that Ukrainians be tortured, that prisoners of war be shot, that the UN finds that 97% of all Ukrainian prisoners of war have been tortured in the most horrific ways we have heard about in human history, that starvation campaigns have been waged against Ukrainians, that Uzkazes decrees abolishing their language, even in the children's singing, have existed for 137 decrees in the space of 2 centuries. A series of, is this because you feel threatened that this has been happening? What is the matter with these Russians vis-a-vis the Ukrainian people? And I think that we have to think about it ourselves because we're going to encounter this argument again and again. I think as soon as you hear, and I just heard it today from a medical technician, but the killing has to stop, you don't have a tanky in front of you, but somebody has been hearing the lines, and you're going to get the mention. And so to me, that's like it sets it's a flag, it's an alert, and I think we need to prepare our argument about that and go to whatever way feels comfortable for you, effective for you. But it is a toughie, and we're going to hear it again and again.
Yeah, it's
Back.
it's true. And one of the things I have used successfully, and it's so simple, it's sort of ridiculous, but is to just point out that that this killing could stop this moment if Russia just turned around and went home. That the entire reason for anybody being killed is the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine. If Russia turned around and left and went home, nobody else would be killed. And that really stops people because they've heard this so much they seem to forget the root causes of all of this. But anyway, I see Prince is here, and I think Alex, it's about time for genocide in Ukraine, right?
That's what I was about to say. It's time for us to step down with Signal and Noise and move on to probably the most important segment we do here at Volia Radio, which is genocide in Ukraine.
Your audience